can the GM companies really police themselves? The short answer to that question is they aren't doing a very good job right now. In 2000, Avantis sold a crop that wasn't intended for human consumption, and it ended up in human consumption. There was a huge public outcry, and they bought back all their stock. They went out of business, basically. That was an economic problem for them, but not really for us as a whole. It wasn't an environmental problem. In 2001, the FDA realized that Monsanto wasn't doing a good enough job policing its farmers and making them produce pesticide-safe zones so that you could have pests live alongside the pesticide-free zones, so that the pests didn't become resistant to the pesticide that was being produced by their crops, the GM crops. And the federal government made Monsanto punish farmers who weren't creating these pesticide-free zones, and everything got a lot better. So now there are pesticide-free zones, and it's working out great. The FDA really did a good job. Unfortunately, there's another issue that's not really so great. Right now, Monsanto is selling this glyphosate-resistant crop, and it's resistant to Roundup, so farmers can put Roundup on their crop. And Roundup's really safe relative to other herbicides. But if you use only Roundup, you're going to get weeds that are resistant to Roundup. There are weeds that are resistant to Roundup right now. They actually have that gene from the crop, the GM crop. It got into the weed, and now the weeds are resistant. The weeds are actually worse than the original weeds. They're huge, and you can't farm a field if the weeds are in it because they're so big. So basically, the farmers with this issue are out of luck. They can't plow their fields, they can't use them. And who's funding the research? Who's doing the research? The University of Georgia. Shouldn't the major companies be doing the research? Well, I certainly think so. But, they're not policing themselves, and they're not fixing their problems. And with federal regulation, they could be. They would have to be. So we need federal regulation. Right now, I don't think that we can demand federal regulation and expect to get it overnight. I think it's going to take a long time. Right now, I think that we have to make the GM companies label their products that have herbicide-resistant or pesticide-forming genes. They should have to label them. There's a barcode system right now. You just flip over and look at the bottom of your food. You'll see, it'll have a 4-digit barcode if it's conventionally produced, and a 5-digit barcode if people want to say that it's organically produced. If people want to say it's GM produced, they can use a different 5-digit barcode, one that starts with a 9. So basically, there are solutions that wouldn't cost that much money, and that would be great if they would do that. So why don't they do that? Because they're afraid people won't buy their crops. So shouldn't we as consumers have the right to choose? I think so. And I think that the companies right now should just step up and do this. And I think that you and I should tell them that with the herbicide-resistant and pesticide-producing crops, and only those, because, just those, they should have to do this. So, what about the long term? And, could we make these changes? Why don't you have to label all your GM food? You don't have to label it because it's substantially equivalent to non-GM food, basically. Because it's basically considered just as safe as non-GM food. And most of the time, this is ample. As long as it's just as safe, I'm fine with it. But with the pesticide producing and the herbicide-resistant crops, I'm not okay. I think that really, when it comes down to it, these crops are being farmed in a different way. And that the test case, the legal case that established substantial equivalence didn't address this issue of different farming practices. I believe that that's a loophole that we can exploit as proponents of labeling certain GM crops. I believe that we should exploit this. We should go there. We should hire a lawyer. We should get something done. And we should get better regulations. I also believe that the EPA should be in charge of regulating these crops that require different farming practices, or that are designed to allow different farming practices. but I'm open to suggestions for which government body it is that actually regulates it. In short, right now, I think we need barcodes because we need to be able to decide whether we want to purchase food that's going to harm the environment or that might harm the environment. Or, the pesticide-resistant crop might actually help the environment, so we should get to choose to buy that too. And basically, I think that in the long run, we should try to get some legal revisions. We should try to get the EPA to do stuff. So, in short, I want you to consider the pros and cons of the GM issue. I want you to think about the farming and how you get to use less herbicide or less pesticide or more, or like you get to use safer varieties if you have the GM crops. And also like the cons, like maybe you'll get resistance and maybe they'll result in worse pests than you had before. I also want you to consider the humanitarian benefits and whether we really want these GM companies to go out of business because they have to label all their crops. And yeah, I just want you to consider what's going on right now and that we need a solution that'll fix and prevent future problems. So I want you to think about how you can improve my proposal, and I want you to take some serious time to consider the GM issue fully, to consider it from all aspects,